When we imagine an emotionally cruel person, we often imagine someone obviously cold, someone without empathy, guilt, or humanity. That image is comforting. It allows us to believe that cruelty belongs to a different kind of person. But emotionally cruel people do not always begin as cruel people. Sometimes they begin as ordinary people carrying resentment they never confronted, shame they never processed, power they were never mature enough to handle, or pain they slowly transformed into permission to humiliate, permission to withdraw affection, permission to punish someone with silence, permission to make another person suffer and still believe they are the victim. Emotional cruelty rarely arrives all at once. It develops through small decisions that gradually stop feeling wrong. A cruel joke becomes normal. Indifference becomes protection. Punishment becomes justice. And eventually, another person's pain no longer activates empathy. It creates satisfaction, control, or nothing at all. This video unfolds through 6 chapters. By the end, you will understand how hidden shame turns into aggression, how the mind creates excuses for cruelty, why authority and group approval weaken moral restraint, and why some people become most dangerous toward those who trust them the most. More importantly, you will learn the warning signs that reveal when resentment is no longer just an emotion, but is becoming part of someone's character. Stay until the final chapter, because the most important question is not simply, why did someone become cruel to me? It is, how do ordinary people recognize this transformation before they become the person causing the damage? If you want to understand the hidden forces controlling human behavior, subscribe to this channel. This is not a comfortable journey, but cruelty becomes most powerful when nobody is willing to examine how it begins. Chapter 1. Cruelty does not begin with cruel people. Cruelty is not always a personality someone is born with. Sometimes it is a behavior that becomes easier through repetition. The first cruel act may produce discomfort. The person sees the damage, feels guilt, and briefly questions themselves. But if that act gives them something, control, emotional relief, social approval, revenge, and nothing meaningful challenges it, the behavior becomes easier to repeat. The insult becomes sharper. The silence lasts longer. The humiliation becomes more public. The person begins testing how much pain they can cause without losing the relationship, the friendship, the position, or the admiration of the crowd. This is how emotional boundaries erode, not through one dramatic decision, but through a series of smaller permissions. Cruelty also becomes easier when another human being is reduced to a label. They are no longer a complicated person with fears, memories, and emotional needs. They become the problem, the weak one, the failure, the enemy, or the person who deserves it. Once someone becomes a category, their pain becomes easier to ignore. This does not mean every angry word is emotional cruelty. Healthy people sometimes lose their temper, withdraw to regulate themselves, or speak carelessly. The difference is found in the pattern. A healthy person can recognize harm, accept responsibility, and attempt repair. An emotionally cruel person uses the harm itself as a tool. Their objective is no longer to communicate. It is to punish, dominate, destabilize, or make the other person feel smaller. The first major transformation happens when someone stops asking, "Am I hurting this person?" and begins asking, how much pain are they willing to tolerate before they finally surrender? Chapter 2. When hidden shame becomes a weapon. Some emotionally cruel people appear extremely confident, but confidence is not always what you are witnessing. Sometimes you are witnessing shame wearing armor. Guilt says, "I did something wrong." Shame says, "There is something wrong with me." When people can tolerate guilt, they can acknowledge what they did, apologize, and change. But shame attacks identity. It makes a person feel defective, powerless, exposed, or inferior. Not everyone carrying shame becomes aggressive. Many become quiet, anxious, or compassionate. But when shame is repeatedly externalized, the person may escape it by transferring it to somebody else. Instead of admitting, "I feel inferior," they search for someone to humiliate. Instead of confronting their insecurity, they attack confidence in others. Instead of processing envy, they discredit the person who activated it. The emotional logic becomes simple. If I can make you feel small, I will not have to feel small beside you. This is why emotionally cruel behavior often intensifies when another person becomes successful, independent, admired, or emotionally secure. Their presence exposes something the cruel person has been trying to hide from themselves. Carl Jung used the term shadow to describe rejected parts of the personality, the impulses and qualities people refuse to recognize as their own. Someone who refuses to confront their envy may become obsessed with proving that other people do not deserve their achievements. Someone ashamed of weakness may become merciless toward anyone who appears vulnerable. Someone terrified of rejection may punish others before they have the opportunity to leave. They believe they are defending themselves, but they are attacking the human reflection of everything they cannot accept within themselves. Cruelty becomes psychological displacement. Another person is forced to carry the shame they refuse to confront, and when humiliation briefly makes them feel powerful, they begin returning to it like a drug. Chapter 3. The mind learns to justify the damage. Most people want to believe they are good. That creates a psychological problem for anyone behaving cruelly. How can someone protect their moral identity while repeatedly causing emotional damage? Psychologist Albert Bandura described a process called moral disengagement, a collection of mental strategies that allow people to violate their values without fully experiencing themselves as immoral. The person does not necessarily eliminate their conscience. They create a language that allows them to move around it. Cruelty becomes teaching someone a lesson. Humiliation becomes telling the truth. Controlling behavior becomes protection. A personal attack becomes only a joke. Punitive silence becomes protecting my peace. This sanitized language changes how the behavior feels internally. Another strategy is minimizing the consequences. They are too sensitive. They will get over it. It was not that serious. The person judges their actions by what they intended, or claim they intended, while dismissing what the other person actually experienced. Then comes comparison. At least I never hit them. At least I am not as bad as their previous partner. Other people would have treated them worse. The behavior is not compared with what is healthy. It is compared with something more extreme, allowing cruelty to appear reasonable. Responsibility can also be displaced. I was only following instructions. Everyone was doing it. They forced me to react that way. The final defense is blaming the target. If the victim can be presented as difficult, unstable, disloyal, weak, or deserving, then punishment begins to feel morally justified. This is the dangerous genius of moral disengagement. It allows a person to cause pain while continuing to see themselves as the hero of the story. The question is no longer, what am I doing to this person? It becomes, what did this person do to deserve what I am doing? Once cruelty has been renamed as justice, almost anything can be defended. Chapter 4. Power removes the restraint. In 1963, psychologist Stanley Milgram published one of the most disturbing studies in social psychology. Participants were instructed by an authority figure to administer what they believed were increasingly powerful electric shocks to another person whenever that person answered incorrectly. The shocks were not real, and the person receiving them was part of the experiment. But the participants believed the suffering was genuine. Many showed visible distress. They sweated, trembled, protested, and asked to stop. Yet in the original condition, 26 out of 40 continued to the maximum level when the authority figure insisted. The participants were not selected because they were known sadists. They were ordinary people placed inside a structure that transformed obedience into duty and shifted the feeling of responsibility upward. Milgram's experiment does not prove that people have no choice. It demonstrates how easily responsibility can become psychologically blurred when authority, procedure, and social expectations all point in the same direction. Power creates emotional danger when it removes consequences. A manager discovers that nobody challenges their humiliation. A popular person realizes the group will laugh whenever they select a target. A partner learns that affection can be withdrawn until the other person surrenders. Every successful act of control teaches the same lesson. I can do this and still keep my position. Groups can accelerate this transformation. One person begins mocking someone. Another joins. The cruelty becomes entertainment. Responsibility is distributed across the crowd until nobody feels personally accountable. Each individual thinks, I was not the only one. But the target experiences the entire group as one weapon. Hannah Arendt's controversial idea of the banality of evil warned that devastating harm does not always require dramatic hatred. It can also be carried out through thoughtlessness, normalization, bureaucracy, and people surrendering personal judgment to a system. The crowd does not always give cruelty new morals. Sometimes it simply gives cruelty camouflage. Chapter 5. Why people become cruelest toward those closest to them. Strangers know very little about your emotional architecture. The people closest to you know where every door leads. They know which insecurity keeps you awake. They know what abandonment means to you. They know what you confessed in private, what you fear losing, and which words will remain inside your mind long after the argument is over. In a healthy relationship, this knowledge creates responsibility. In an emotionally cruel relationship, it becomes ammunition. A private insecurity is mentioned publicly. A past mistake is repeatedly reopened. Affection is withdrawn at the precise moment reassurance is needed. Silence is used until the other person becomes desperate enough to apologize, even when they did nothing wrong. There is an important difference between taking space and using the silent treatment as punishment. Healthy space is communicated. It has a purpose, a reasonable limit, and an intention to return to the conversation. Punitive silence creates uncertainty deliberately. It makes the target anxious, powerless, and emotionally hungry. Communication is withheld until obedience is achieved. Gaslighting can serve a similar function. It is not simply remembering an event differently. It is the repeated manipulation of another person's perception until they begin distrusting their own memory, judgment, or emotional reality. The cruel person may provoke a reaction and then use that reaction as evidence. They insult until the target shouts, ignore until the target begs, confuse until the target becomes unstable. Then they point at the reaction and say, "This is why nobody can deal with you." The response to cruelty is presented as the cause of cruelty. This cycle is particularly powerful inside close relationships because leaving may carry emotional, financial, professional, or social consequences. The cruel person understands this. That is why they may appear kind to outsiders while becoming merciless in private. Public kindness protects their reputation. Private cruelty protects their control. Emotional cruelty does not always scream. Sometimes it watches someone collapse and calmly asks why they are being so dramatic. Chapter 6. The line. An ordinary person must never cross. The transformation into emotional cruelty leaves warning signs. Someone begins feeling relief when another person suffers. They become harsher when an audience is present. They spend more time explaining why the target deserved the pain than examining the pain they caused. They use silence to make someone beg. They transform disagreement into degradation. They stop seeing emotional vulnerability as something to protect and begin viewing it as something to exploit. Perhaps the most dangerous warning sign is the disappearance of curiosity. The person no longer wonders what the other human being is experiencing. They already possess a story that explains everything. They are weak. They are manipulative. They are ungrateful. They deserve it. And once another person has been declared deserving of pain, empathy becomes unnecessary. Stopping this transformation requires more than thinking of yourself as a good person. It requires observing your behavior when you feel rejected, humiliated, jealous, powerless, or angry. Can you experience shame without exporting it? Can you possess power without needing someone beneath you? Can you hear that you caused harm without immediately presenting yourself as the real victim? Accountability begins when explanation stops being used as an escape. A meaningful apology does not say, "I am sorry you felt hurt." It identifies the behavior, acknowledges the impact, accepts responsibility, and demonstrates change. For those experiencing emotional cruelty, understanding its psychological origin does not mean tolerating it. Pain may explain why someone became cruel. It does not authorize them to make you their emotional sacrifice. You cannot heal another person by continuously providing them with someone to punish. When cruelty becomes persistent, boundaries, distance, outside support, or professional intervention may become necessary. Compassion should never require the destruction of your dignity. Ordinary people do not usually become emotionally cruel in one moment. The transformation follows a sequence. A wound becomes resentment. Resentment creates a story. The story grants permission. Permission produces repetition. Repetition creates emotional reward. And eventually, the behavior becomes identity. This is why the earliest moments matter. The first time someone enjoys another person's humiliation. The first time they use silence to create fear. The first time they excuse the damage because the target supposedly deserved it. The first time they recognize pain and choose to continue. We love believing that cruelty belongs to monsters because monsters are easy to separate from ourselves. But the more difficult truth is that the capacity for cruelty exists inside ordinary human psychology. Character is not proven by how kindly you treat people who admire you. It is revealed by how you treat someone who disappointed you when you possess the power to punish them and nobody else is watching. The darkness Jung described cannot be defeated by pretending it does not exist. It must be recognized, confronted, and governed. Because whatever remains unconscious does not remain harmless. So when another person's pain appears before you, pause. Do not immediately explain it. Do not compare it. Do not hide behind the crowd. Do not transform it into something they deserved. Allow their pain to interrupt you. Cruelty begins when another person's suffering no longer matters. Humanity begins the moment you decide that it must matter again.